Hey, here I am to talk with you about what we did during our week 14 Latin seminar. So this is a bit of a follow-up to how our class discussion went, and if you're needing a little refresher on adjectives, maybe you might find it helpful. So in class, the concepts we were going to cover were the introduction of adjectives and this lesson 7.2, the agreement of adjectives. It was pages 72 through 74. Anyway, so the way I usually start out our conversation is with a list of vocabulary, and we scribbled on it as we went through the class. This is what it ended up looking like at the end of class. But anyway, we just had the words on the board, and I asked them to make observations. And so in that process of observations, we realized that these vocabulary were set up a little differently than we're used to seeing. When vocabulary on previous pages has been introduced, and if they're nouns, we are given the nominative singular and the genitive singular, either the word or the ending. So, but this time it looks like we have one word, but there's a couple of endings there. And so we have that usa, and I was like, well, does that look familiar to you at all? What do you recognize? And so, of course, one of the kids pipes up, it looks kind of like noun endings. And so we pulled our noun endings chart out, and sure enough, we have our us, our and our And so we were like, we have a new part of speech today. And so these are adjectives, and because they are these endings, usa, which are the nominative singular endings of first and second declension, we are going to identify these words as first and second declension adjectives. So that's what we did. And so I was like, well, we've made our observations, so we headed over to our textbook to read. They take turns reading and trying to explain what they read to the class. So right now we're doing first and second declension endings. Eventually we are going to be introduced to third, but we don't have to worry about those right now. So all of the adjectives we're doing right now are going to follow and use the model of our first and second declension noun endings. Anyway, so we read through this page, we talked about it, and we compared it to the declension chart. We discussed everything here, and then we talked about the fact that because we have this masculine, feminine, neuter, it means we must have to really know our noun genders. And part of that discussion, we touched on the fact, usually you're always asking your definition questions, like what is an adjective? And so they're like, well, an adjective modifies a noun. And so it kind of makes sense that adjectives would be related to nouns in some form or fashion in Latin. And sure enough, they are going to use noun endings. So because adjectives modify nouns, they are going to take on the gender of that noun. So I had these three phrases up on the board. We spent some time thinking about the Latin word for friend, recognizing that it was masculine. So that's why I have blue here. Therefore, the adjective would be masculine. This is going to take on the masculine endings. Road is a feminine noun, so our adjective will take on a feminine ending. Name is a neuter noun, and so our adjective will take on the neuter endings. Notice I have the same adjective in all three. That way we understand that the adjective itself doesn't matter. It's the gender of the noun that matters. So, and also we noticed that like this is a second declension noun. That's a first declension noun, and this is actually a third declension noun. So these are first, second declension adjectives. It doesn't really matter what declension the noun is. And basically what the declension of the noun does is it helps us to identify the gender. So anyway, so we talked a lot about noun genders and how the adjectives connect to that. So that means that we needed to move forward and learn how to decline an adjective. In order to decline an adjective, you need to know your stem. So we went back to our original word here, and we had boxed out our usa, already. And so when you take off this us, then you're left with your stem. So we identified the stem in all of our words. So I double underlined those. And we pulled out our workbook so that we could decline. So let's see here. Here we go. At the top part of this page, I have basically it's from Rule 72 in the grammar book. It has the masculine, feminine, neuter endings for this particular adjective. So I let them just on their own work on seeing if they could decline this adjective following the model of that one. And they, if they had a question, they could talk to their partner or so forth. So I usually do mine in color just because it helps me to take a picture of it. If a parent has a question, I can send it to them. And but I don't know, the kids usually use pencils or whatever. But anyway, I like the visual of the colors. It makes it easy for parents to grade their kids' work quickly. Anyway, so we declined that, and then we moved on to recognizing, let's see, this right here, Agreement of Adjectives. So these phrases right here I put on the board. And so here are my notes over here. And I called on kids' names and had them, tell me which one's the adjective. So we labeled the adjective on all of them. And I was like, do you see any patterns? And they were like, well, the adjective seems to always come after the noun, except for this one. And so we talked through that and decided to read in our textbook. We actually kind of skipped this and went back to it afterwards. So over here, I was like, well, let's look a little bit further at this. So we took exercise 84, and I asked them to circle all the adjectives and underline all the nouns, because I wanted to see if we could identify, before we actually read the rule, I want to see if they could figure out a pattern for which, how to know which one comes first, whether it precedes the noun or comes after the noun. Anyway, after we did that, we were like, well, what do y'all notice? And they said, well, number 6, 11, and 14, the adjective follows the noun. And so that happens to be bonus, there it is again, and malus. All right, so good and bad. So we thought, well, let's figure out. There's got to be a rule or a pattern. And how are those two words different from the other words in the vocabulary? So we talked about that a little bit, and then we came in here and we read this part of the page, position of adjectives. And I remember one year, several years ago, one of the moms would happen to be in the class, and she's like, it's kind of like we can call it the Walmart rule, because when you go to Walmart, you can buy a large quantity of clothing. It may not be quality, but you can get a lot of it. Whereas if you were to go to Macy's for your clothes, you're going to get fewer clothes for the same amount of money. Anyway, so we call it the Walmart rule, quantity before quality. So if a noun involves quantity, it's something quantifiable, something you can count. Like you can count how deep something is, or how high something is, or how long something is. You can count that. Those adjectives are going to come before their nouns. If it's a quality, that's not really something quantifiable. So those are the good and the bad. We had gone through our vocabulary list, and we looked at the meaning, and we identified which ones are things that are quality related as opposed to quantity related. We did get down here to this one, and we were like, well, that one's not really quantity. But if you take a look over here, we do have an exception to the rule. It says in Christian Latin, this word usually precedes the noun. So I didn't circle it. I think I did in class, but then we figured it out later that there was an exception to the rule. So I have a star next to it here. Anyway, so this helps us with word order for adjectives. There is a pattern to word order. And then we went back and we talked about the fact that adjectives are going to agree with their nouns in number and case. So that would be using these phrases. We took a look at our noun. This noun is accusative singular. It's also feminine. So I'm going to go to my feminine column right here, accusative singular. That's the first declension. And we're going to use Okay. This one, our noun, is nominative plural. And this is masculine. So our masculine column is the us column. And we're going to go to nominative plural and use that ending. You see how they line up? Where'd it go? Yes. So the endings themselves don't match. The case and number match. So based on gender. So this word here, zeros, is an accusative plural noun that is masculine. So we go to the masculine column and find the accusative plural, and there it is. So our adjective will take on that ending. Down here, we have this one. Here's our noun, ibis, and it's following a preposition, so this is going to be ablative, all right? And the word flumen happens to be neuter. So we're going to go to our neuter column, which is our column, and we're going to go down to the ablative plural, and we're going to use is. Okay, now notice that was a third declension noun we were talking about, but it is neuter, and this happens to be a first, second declension adjective, so we need to use the neuter ending for first, second declension, which is here. Okay, so anyway, that we kind of ran out of time at that point. I think we did play a game of gender dash where girls against boys, they had to, you know, we used these cards. I don't have a noun card in front of me, but we used the ones with the pictures, and they identified the gender of the nouns, because that is really key to this, and it will make your life so much less frustrating if you know the genders of your nouns in order to figure out these adjectives. So last but not least, we talked through we might have done this earlier, but we went back to it, we looked at it. I will have them highlight this over the course of the week. When they're at home, I'll take a picture of it. And anyway, so this gives us the rules of those adjectives. Anyway, I hope this is helpful.